this is John for MTG Nexus doing another quick deck overview for one of the more popular decks that's been popping up in the modern format, and that is Rakdos Scam. As a friendly reminder, if you like these informative, quick-hitting videos, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, leaving a constructive comment down below, maybe letting me know what deck you might like to see us cover next. So Rakdos Scam is a Rakdos mid-range deck that is trying to scam the opponent out of with a quick start. This deck is very similar in what it's trying to execute to a deck like Reanimator and Legacy without the enormously huge bomb. So you're not getting an Arcana Cruelty or a Gristlebrand into play, but you are trying to get this ridiculously huge advantage by playing either a copy of Grief by evoking it on turn 1 and double thought seizing your opponent with some cards we'll talk about later, or you're casting a Fury, killing their turn 1 play, and putting a 4/4 double striker into play. To that end, you're playing a bunch of undying effects, very similar to what Ephemerate would do in this situation. Undying Malice, Undying Evil, and Malakir Rebirth, as well as Feign Death. A lot of these put +1/+1 counters, and then the next time a creature would die this turn, it comes back into play with a +1/+1 counter on it, other than, I think, Undying Evil just doesn't, it comes back. So either which way, you're trying to get this ridiculously huge advantage on turn 1 by playing one of these, like I said, either double thought seizing your opponent with Grief and then putting a 4/3 menace attacker into play, or furying their first play, like say Ragavan, a Mana Dork, whatever, and then putting a 4/4 into play, double striking and just hoping to close out the game. To compare with that, you're also playing things like Ragavan as another turn 1 must answer play, Thoughtseize to disrupt them along with Grief, Dauthi Voidwalker is a way to disrupt graveyard, especially graveyard-based decks, or, you know, playing Dauthi Voidwalker and griefing or Thoughtseizing an enormous play out of their hand, getting ahead that way, and then, you know, just some good, solid Rakdos cards in between. Notably, you're playing things like Croxat and Terminate, not only because, obviously, they're okay modern Magic cards. Terminate, obviously not the best, does kill things like Murktide and such, but because it pitches to both Grief and Fury, and you do need some amount of those plays. As far as other backbreaking plays, things like Blood Moon and Liliana, while Liliana has certainly fallen off in stock, you know, playing it on turn 2 off of Ragavan, you know, that Deathray Shaman plus Liliana got a lot of things banned. So very similar play. Obviously turn 2 Blood Moons can be quite backbreaking, even turn 3 Blood Moons. Then Seasoned Pyromancer is kind of a way to recoup, to recycle a bunch of cards. You know, one of the downsides of this particular deck is if you have a Grief Fury opening with Malakir Rebirth or Undying Malice, if your opponent happens to answer it, you're really down on resources, and you're really kind of relying on this getting ahead on resources to kind of win the game. And Seasoned Pyromancer is kind of a grindy card to help you get back into the mid-game if your opponent happens to deal with your initial rush of whatever your play is. Coolgun's Command, obviously another grindy card, allows you to rebuy any of your threats. Very modal card in what it does. Knight's Whisper, very similar, different things. Beyond that, the sideboard, you're looking at dealing with specific matchups, Engineered Explosives for things like Rhinos and such, Fatal Push when you need some more removal spells against decks like Burn, or you know, decks with opposing Ragavans, etc. Collective Brutality when you need a little bit more Thoughtseize insurance, plus, you know, pretty good against a deck like Burn. Torok, very good against anything with white-based removal, so whether it be your 4-color control decks or blue-white control decks, you know, especially if you're able to kick it. Licensors for any type of Murktide or graveyard nonsense like Living Under Dredge. Necromentia for any type of deck that is really reliant on one key card, like Primeval Titan decks, or, you know, those kind of things. Jeskai Ascendancy combo. Any deck that's basically revolving around one thing. You could even bring this in against something potentially like the Yawgmoth combo to take Yawg out of their deck, etc. Then I guess the Moon to pair with your Blood Moons in the main deck. Hitsugu, okay in a lot of spots. You know, being able to blow up a bunch of things can be good against Hammer, can be decent against graveyard decks as another slow graveyard hate piece. Can be really good against Rhinos, wiping out all the Rhinos. Ingot Tuner, once again, you know, something else you can evoke and blow up a bunch of artifacts, pretty good against Hammer or Urza Saga decks. Taking a look at this list, you're seeing a lot of the same cards, but a little bit different in what their execution. You know, like I said, the main deck's kind of, but this time you're only running Undying Malice and Malakir Rebirth, since they all they come back into the player's control. And then Voidwalker, you're still seeing all the same cards. One difference, you're seeing Fable the Mirror Breaker over something like Seasoned Pyromancer. Both of these are kind of fix the wrong half of the deck problems, and the back half of Kiki-Jiki can obviously pair quite nicely with griefing or furying your opponent every turn. Being able to cast a grief on every upkeep, basically making sure your opponent can't cast any more spells unless they're at instant speed. Copying a fury allows you to kind of dome your opponent's board while also putting another 3/3 double striker with haste into play. And you're still executing a lot of the same plans, and you still have the threat of Ragavan here kind of chilling out. Sideboard, once again, you're going to see a lot of the same cards. Chalice of the Void, much like Hitsugu, can be very good against the Rhinos based decks. Also can be good against other Cascade decks like Glimpse Combo or Living End. Engineered Explosives helps clean up anything like Rhinos, Tarmogoyfs, Death Shadows, all that kind of nonsense. Unlicensed Hearse, very good against the graveyard stuff. Necromancer we've covered. Mixless, this is primarily against the grindy based decks. Whether it be 4-color control. Also, ironically good against burn because the gaining life from the +1 whenever you copy it. There are some situations where you can get, a 4 or 5, loyalty, so not too crazy to potentially dome your opponent out with Mixless's Ultimate. But mainly here for the grindy matchups and burn is a little bit of life gain. And, you're still seeing a lot of the same cards. The two main people I've seen pushing this deck are Young Dingo and Andrea Mengucci. I know Mengucci in his latest video cut Duffy Voidwalker for other cards, and he talked about how Terminate is not a particularly good modern Magic card, but like I said, it pitches to both of the elementals that you're trying to bring back with your Undying Malices or Malika Rebirths. And overall, this deck once again is just trying to get ahead. And it struggles against interaction in the turn 2, turn 3, turn 4. If you answer their Reborn, Grief, or Fury, or if you answer their Ragavan, or if they had to mulligan to Oblivion. This is a deck that has to have that aggressive early start. Now it can kind of play a mid-range game, but it's really relying on broken cards. Double Thought Seizing you with Grief. Putting a 4/4 double striker into play. Hitting you with a Ragavan quickly. Putting a Bloodman into play. All of these Haymaker-esque plays very similar to a Mono Red Prison or a Reanimator in Legacy. While it's not going to win the game on the spot, it forces you to, if you can't answer those 1 or 2 threats, you're going to lose the game very quickly. And this deck is really built to kind of capitalize on those particular openings. As far as the deck's placed in the meta, from what I've heard, I don't personally have any experience with this deck. I've played against it maybe once or twice with Burn, which is my modern deck that I have access to currently because I'm no longer doing Mana Traders. The deck is apparently very good against Murktide. Getting a 4/4 Fury down can be quite problematic for them apparently. It takes them a little bit while to get a Delirium from an Unholy Heat. Meanwhile, you're beating them down for 8 points a turn. That ends the game very quickly. 4-color control, with 1 Solitude can kind of screw up the game plan. And then all these other different decks, it just matters of, can they answer your first threat, and then can they establish their own game plan very quickly shortly thereafter. Those games, they don't play a very good grindy game plan because they invest so many resources in that first play. Oftentimes you're emptying 3/4 of your opening hand in your first turn. Now you're getting a huge advantage. You're pitching, playing a Grief, Thought Seizing them, bringing it back, Thought Seizing them again. You've pitched 3 cards plus played a land. It's 4 cards of, say, your 6-card opener. All of a sudden you only have 2 cards left, after turn 1. Yeah, you have this 4/3 menace threat, and they're down 2 of their best cards, but if they top deck, a Prismatic Ending or a Prismatic, the new Leyline of Binding, and they deal with your threat, on turn 2 or turn 3, all of a sudden you're in this kind of resource game where your opponent's just going to overpower you. So like I said, they're very dependent on their opening starts. They can play a decent mid-range game plan depending on how the hands develop, but this is a deck very much designed to scam the opponent out of wins by getting this huge advantage at the very beginning of the game and just trying to take over from there. So anyways, that is kind of the rundown on Rakdos Scam, and this is a deck that will probably continue to evolve over time, as what it's doing is a very powerful effect. And there are enough Undying Malices, Malika Rebirths, Undying Evil variants in the format that this gets more interesting, especially if they ever happen to print more of these powerful elementals. Obviously, we had the 5: subtlety, endurance, grief, fury, and whatever one I'm blanking on, solitude. Solitude, fury, grief, endurance, solemn, and whatever the blue one is, solitude, not solitude. Yeah, either which way. But, yeah. I mean, these decks are powerful for what they do. They have a very powerful opening. They have very powerful payoffs. They're a little bit inconsistent, but when they hit, man, they hit like a truck. So, if you'd like to see that kind of content, I'll try to link to Young Dingo's page as well as Andrea's, as you want to get some video views for terms of what the deck's trying to execute. But that's from what I've observed, and the few times I've played against it, that's what the deck's trying to do. And if you can happen to survive that first turn or two, with your game plan relatively intact, you will have a decent time against them. But, like I said, their deck is built to get ahead and stay ahead. So, as always, this has been John for MTG Nexus with a quick deck overview with Rakdos Scam. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know what deck you might like to see us cover next.